it's Joe Pardavila, and thanks for joining me for another episode of the Forbes Books podcast. And leadership can be complicated. I mean, even the definition itself, like if you went to Merriam-Webster's, the definition of leadership is a capacity to lead. Not very helpful. I mean, you can find great quotes like Jack Welch, the old CEO of General Electric, described leadership as leaders establish trust with candor, transparency, and credit. So yeah, leadership is complicated. And joining me today is someone who has some experience in that. She is a government and public policy strategist, leadership coach, and keynote speaker. Her name is Cicely Simpson. Cicely, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Joe. Great to be with you.
I have to ask you, because one of the things that I'm super inspired by is that you've been inspired by so many great leaders in the past. And one that comes up a lot when I'm doing research on you is Shirley Chisholm. Did I get the name right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For folks not familiar with her, who is she and why has she inspired you so much?
Shirley Chisholm was the first African-American congresswoman back in the 70s. She also happened to be, believe it or not, a little known fact about her, she also ran for president. She was the first woman to run on a presidential platform back in the 70s as well. So very influential and certainly a trailblazer before her time. What really inspires me about her and her story is not only the fact that she really is somebody who made her own way, but her quote that really resonates with me, and it's one of her more famous quotes, is, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. She ran for Congress because she wanted to. She brought her folding chair. She ran for president because she pulled up her chair and thought she could make a difference. I love that quote and really how it resonates with people when I mention it, that you don't wait to be invited somewhere. Make your way, make your place, and once you're there, that's really getting your seat at the table and staying there. So her quote just resonates with me, and I've found it really a powerful motivator for clients and for speeches that I do as well.
And do you remember how old you were when you discovered her?
Believe it or not, I just discovered her a couple of years ago.
Really?
Even when I worked in Congress, I had always heard the name, but had not really sat down and did the research. And then I did the research on her, and this quote just continually pops up. And I thought, what an amazing untold story, because so few people really realize the platform and really the glass ceiling, that she tried to break. So a powerful story, but I only found her in that quote recently.
It's shocking because, talking to you, getting ready to speak to you, the quote came up a lot and I was just fascinated by her. And I was like, how is there not a movie about her or something like that? And I guess they just announced one that Regina King is going to play her. So that's good to know, because I was like, when I was reading up, I'm like, this is an amazing story. This has to be a movie. So I was glad to find out that they're finally making one.
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, long overdue. I mean, she's amazing. Her story, and it's funny, you sort of heard it a little bit, Joe, with Kamala Harris running for vice president, that while she's the first one elected, actually, these are all the people that have preceded her in trying to do the same. And that truly is, before the movie was announced, that's truly, I think, probably the most public acknowledgement that Shirley Chisholm has received in the last few years really came because Kamala Harris was running for president and vice president. So it's kind of interesting how you sort of see this evolution of this story and of this moment, that, that she's the first one, Kamala Harris is the first person, Vice President Harris is the first person to have the role, but look who came before her and tried it. And there was a really cool visual that I posted either my Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn post, but it has a picture of Shirley Chisholm, Rosa Parks, and very influential women of color who all paved the way for Kamala Harris. It's such a powerful visual, but yes, Shirley Chisholm is right there in the middle, and it's amazing.
And leadership seems to be a big part of your life. How did you gravitate to that? Because I always wonder with folks who find like a niche in sort of these high level things. It's not like you're an expert in botany or something or horticulture. It's leadership. So what attracted you to leadership?
What attracted me to leadership, and quite frankly, it's been an interest of mine for a number of years that has evolved, really started with my career moving to Washington. I started out as a prosecutor, believe it or not. So not many people go from wanting to be a prosecutor of criminals to actually political, sort of being in the political realm every day. But I've learned over the last few years throughout my career here in Washington, a lot of people, male and female, will approach me and say, so how did you get this role? Or how did you excel in your career? How have you held all these positions? People are just fascinated. And you know this, Joe, we all love stories. We all love personal stories, personal triumph stories. And so I've gotten that question a lot. And so really I've come to my desire to be a leadership coach, but also helping others with leadership strategies because, first of all, I've tried them myself and I've failed and I've succeeded and certainly have pulled up my own chair, so to speak, to the table of influence. But also it's the reaction I get from others when they ask me those questions and the strategies and the advice I share. It just really resonates with people. So I've been in public speaking for 20 years. But when it comes to telling your story and really helping people develop their own story, that's the sweet spot of leadership that really gets me excited, that really has brought me to this point of developing the chair leadership program, but also coaching clients both individually and collectively to reach the success they desire.
And so that brings us full circle to the beginning of our conversation with Shirley Chisholm, to the chair leadership, which is an acronym, correct?
Correct.
And what does CHAR stand for?
So I took the word chair, obviously, to your point, inspired by the Shirley Chisholm quote, and I developed 5 leadership strategies, one for each letter of the word chair, to really map out leadership strategies that I've used in my career to help coach and guide others. So the C is for championing yourself. The H is for honesty, in this case, self-honesty. The A is for adaptability. The I is for impact. And the R is for regrets.
And so when you're teaching these things, are there one of those elements that are harder than the other? Are some easier for people to process? What have you learned so far?
That's a great question. So 2 pieces. One, we start with the C of championing yourself. And I always explain to people, notice I didn't choose the word confidence because confidence is such a loaded word that people assign, either high or low value to. Championing yourself really is an action-oriented, proactive behavior that really means, you're putting yourself first. That piece, Joe, is so foundational to the other 4 strategies that I really spend a lot of time with clients, both individually and in group coaching, really talking about honing and refining their comfort with championing their self. But the hardest piece of it is actually the H, which is honesty. Because the self-honesty we're talking about is, you can champion yourself all day long, but what are the weaknesses and blind spots you may have that's holding you back? What are you doing that you may or may not know that you're doing, right, that would affect people? So I always say to people, and I've learned myself in my career, know how you land on people. How you are perceived often becomes reality. And so that H of self-honesty, self-deception, how do you really get out of your own way, can really be a difficult part of the course, but it also can be a very powerful breakthrough for a lot of clients who really dig in and do the work.
Have you noticed that all of a sudden, I'm a Gen Xer, so I remember we never used to hear anything bad about our leaders. Like, I remember the first political scandal I recall was the Gary Hart one in, I think, 84, when he got caught, diddling somebody else and all this stuff, and he had to resign running for the Democratic seat for president. And up until then, I just didn't remember anything bad. And now all of a sudden, we know everything about our leaders. Like, as great as leaders and men JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. were, now we know all this other dirty laundry that's happening. So how do we separate the person from the leader? Or can we? How do we do that?
Well, I think any leader will tell you they have their moments of failure, whether that's a character failure, whether that's behavior, whatever form of manifestation that may take. I'm not sure we can separate the two so much as acknowledge that we tend to think of leaders on a pedestal. We tend to think of people, we really try to put them atop of their field or certainly separated from the rest. And I think the key there, Joe, is whether it is someone like a Gary Hart or, someone sitting next to you in the cubicle beside you, everyone can be leaders in their space where they are, and we're all going to mess up. We all screw up often. The key is to correct those mistakes and move on. And so I think the high profile nature of some of these leaders, but let's be honest, it's also the role of technology. There's a camera everywhere. There's, a hidden mic moment, that happens. I think the reason the leader it's so pronounced now is, quite frankly, because we realize that everybody's fallible. Everybody has problems. Everybody has failures. And let's be honest, the American people love a great redemption story. We love someone who falls from grace, admits their faults, and then chooses to pull themselves up and rise again, right? That's sort of the hope that we always sort of have as an American story. So I don't know if it's separating the two so much as acknowledging that there's both the good and the bad.
It's so funny you say that because Bill Maher, who people love or hate him, has this great thing that he brings up all the time. It's okay that we have two thoughts at one time. Like we can believe this, but we can also believe something else that's contradictory to that. So I think that's a great way of putting it. Is like you just separate the two. And do you believe, you worked in Washington, is there, I keep hearing this, and I don't know if it's a fallacy or not, but because of the culture we live in, you talk about, how everything's recorded, there's always a hot mic, that folks who have maybe a sordid past or maybe made mistakes in the past will be afraid to run for higher office because they know all of that will be, dragged through the coals. Do you see truth in that people will be hesitant to become leaders or become bigger leaders because of that?
Absolutely. I think, and it's funny that has come up in a number of conversations I've had with people when I've said, would you ever consider running for office? Or when I engage in that conversation, that absolutely becomes part of the narrative and answer that I get. So I do believe it has, it does have a role. And let's be honest, what you see on the news are those hot mic moments, or those moments where the camera showed up and no one knew it was there, and then they try to walk it back. And I think because that is so prevalent and in front of us as the soundbite that we're shown, then yes, I think that it does lead to a reluctance, to run for office and or publicly have your background aired or, viewed or vetted by the American public. It absolutely has a role, I think, in who runs for office. But let's be honest, it can also have a role in something like the school board. Who runs for school board in your local community? I actually read an article last week that one of the most hotly contested elected offices in the country right now, is the local school board because of the scrutiny that is happening in local communities of reopening schools because of the pandemic. I mean, whoever would have thought that school board is now like the hot race, to be in or not be in. So it's interesting how these things manifest themselves both from sort of a national level all the way down to who's representing your district in the school board in your local hometown.
And when you talk to these leaders who've had hesitancy to maybe sign up to run for office, do you try to convince them one way or the other, or is it just such an incredibly personal choice where, hey, listen, I know I could do this job, but it's just not worth it? Because I think that at the end of the day, that's the question. Is it worth it to these folks who they're probably incredibly influential already, very successful, but it's a shame that we're losing out on the opportunity of having these people lead us?
It is an incredibly personal decision. It also, to your point, what is inspiring them or what is holding them back? It often becomes a conversation of, what really is driving, what is that drive, what problems are they seeking to solve, which honestly just translates to, are they in this for the right reasons? So are you in this to really solve problems and help people, or is there another reason that you would, seek such an office? So it becomes a very personal conversation. I do not try to convince people one way or the other. And quite frankly, when I'm asked the question, Cicely, why don't you run for office? I don't answer the question, I don't try to sort of skew them one way or the other when they're asking me the same thing. My answer is usually, that's just not my choice. That's not where how I choose to have impact and make a difference, even though I work in this world every day. So it is a very personal answer and conversation, but also one that I think we can have more of in this country to really bring out those servant leaders and really get them involved in the public arena.
How is your BS radar from working in Washington all those years? You talk about, what's the reason for these folks to run for office. Can you tell, are you so finely tuned, like a tuning fork, and be like, yeah, this person's just running because they're power hungry, or this person's just running because of X, or person's running because of Y?
Oh, absolutely. You can absolutely tell. And obviously, if the conversation's in person, their face and body language will also tell you. But if it's over the phone, I'll get calls from candidates who are running around the country. And they're trying to convince me why they're running, and, I should give money or support their campaign. And yeah, the BS radar is totally high. You can absolutely sniff it out and know if they're really genuine about their interest or if there's another motivator that they're pursuing.
All right, so I want to blend a couple things we've talked about, leadership and politics. So when you're coaching these leaders, as you know, this may be breaking news. I'm not sure, Cicely, but we're in a pretty divisive time right now, and people are on both sides of the fence. So I'm curious how you talk to leaders about managing personalities and politics, because now more than ever, I mean, I was talking about the Gary Hart days. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, it was like the Republican Democrats. It was, you know, when someone said the other person's party, there wasn't like vitriol coming out. They didn't say it as if it was a cuss word or something, where that's changed now. So how do you coach these leaders when it comes to managing this stuff? Because again, another theme in this conversation is the fact that because of technology, everyone knows what everyone else is doing. So everyone knows what their party affiliation is and what that can provide or what that can cause in the workplace. What are a couple things you may say to these leaders?
Well, I've had the benefit, Joe, as you well know, of living at the intersection of business and politics for the last 20 years. So I've had government roles and I've had business roles. And, you know, I quite frankly live at the intersection of both. And so learning really, yes, the vitriol is absolutely palpable right now. And a lot of the questions I get from folks that I'm coaching in the business community, you know, whether they're someone's just starting their career or a mid-level manager or even a CEO who's working with their board, the conversation very often becomes, how do you manage differing points of view? How do you not impugn motives, but seek to engage in tough conversations with your peers or with your boss to really seek to understand, is always my point of view. Don't assume, don't make assumptions, don't prescribe motives or statements to someone. Seek to understand, ask questions. That is one way, quite frankly, I think we can reduce the temperature in this country politically, but also for people who are really seeking to enhance their leadership skills in their jobs every day. It really is, it just boils down to communication. And that's the piece where I quite frankly spend a lot of my time coaching around and I always say the three critical skills that no one's ever going to tell you is managing up, managing down, and managing across. And all three of those are all about communication, seeking to bridge gaps, finding points of commonality, collaboration, cooperation. So I spent a lot of time coaching and teaching communication strategies that fit within the chair model.
And you know, let's try to be a little optimistic here. So now we've gone through this incredibly contentious presidential election. We've had a pandemic, you know, that we're hopefully seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, the phrase that a lot of people like to say. But do you see us recovering anytime soon, or do you see a lot of this underlying stuff, whether it's the mask and vaccine discussions that we're going to probably have for the next year or so, or this, you know, stolen election stuff? Can you see some sort of healing in the future?
In the near term, no. I think people are very passionate. To your point, let's be positive. I just said no.
Thank you, Cicely.
People are very dug into their beliefs right now. To your point, whether that's mask or elections or, you know, a whole host of things. I think in the short term, we are where we are, and we will continue in our current path. Do I think long term it gets better? Absolutely. I think the light is at the end of the tunnel, because whether you like it or not, a lot of these conversations are happening. You know, I just had a conversation yesterday about someone with a mask. You don't know who's vaccinated and who's not. So wearing a mask, not wearing a mask. A lot of people are full on taking on those conversations, both in the interest of themselves, but, you know, certainly also family members or people they may be around. So the thing that gives me hope, Joe, is I think there's a willingness to engage in the conversation. What I do find fascinating right now, and my crystal ball is not telling me which way it's going to go, is this really this quote unquote fight for the soul of America. You know, what's going on in the Republican Party right now, whether you believe the election was stolen, whether you don't believe the election was stolen, whether you believe the riots on January the 6th were an attack on our democracy. There's some, you know, certainly the racial tensions in the country. There's some real fundamental conversations that are being had right now that give me hope that we're confronting differing points of view to find compromise. But I do think it's going to be a little bit of a runway before we get there.
Is it sad? I mean, you've been in politics for such a long time. The politicization of like health in this country. I mean, I'm sure for the first time in your life in politics, it's happened due to the pandemic. But is it sad that it's come down to this? The fact that, you know, and I'm perfectly guilty of this. When I see someone strutting around the store without a mask, I automatically think, oh, that person voted for Trump. And it bothers me that I think like that, but it's hard for me to separate the two. The fact that, that there's parts, and it's not all Republicans, but there's parts of that party that politicize the mask wearing and whether you should wear a mask or not, or whether you should get vaccinated or not. Does that kind of sort of eat at your soul a little bit?
Without question. It absolutely does. And listen, I have, a similar reaction when I see people without masks, not that they voted for Trump, but because I live in Tennessee and I come between Washington, D.C. and Tennessee, I see both sides of it. Mm-hmm. D.C. people are very adamant about wearing their mask. In Tennessee, they're not. A lot of that is political ideologies playing out in very different parts of the country. But you're right. I've been in politics over 20 years. I've never seen it like this. Certainly, we've seen a politicization of science in the past and, who's right, who's wrong on climate change and a host of other matters. But never has, I think, public health been attacked, and maybe not even attacked so much as doubted the way that it is right now. I think that makes me fearful because as you hear people in Washington talk about the next pandemic or the next whatever is coming, then we know that, this coronavirus is a moment in time where we're going to have booster shots like the flu shot and everything else. But what's next? And can we overcome this politicization of public health to get ready for the next big thing that may be around the corner? So it's incredibly concerning. Both of you talk to politicians, but also, just different people around the country. What the solve is for that, though, I think is a harder question.
And I want to wrap things up on another Shirley Chisholm quote. She said, "I'm looking for no man walking this earth for approval of what I'm doing." In a nutshell, that pretty much encapsulates her life and her story and a bit what your life and story. So talk to me about how you go through life, the path you've chosen, and the fact that you're doing what you want to do.
I love that quote by her. I love that you found that. I think she was very unapologetic in her beliefs and the roles and positions that she sought to play. Joe, I tell myself I'd like to think I'm the same. I am very much someone who lives by the no regrets. I don't worry about what other people think of me, right or wrong. I simply know that there's a path in certain roles, and I've wanted to excel in my career. And so I've, self-taught leadership strategies, tried and true about how to reach the highest levels of my career and reach the positions I want to be in. But part of that for me has truly been, I don't second guess myself. If there's an opportunity that comes, I will try anything, knowing that you never know where that door is going to lead. So part of what I appreciate about Shirley Chisholm is she walked through those doors when they opened. And if the door was closed, then she pushed them open. I hope in my career that, I've been the youngest to hold some positions. I've certainly been the only African-American woman to hold some positions, or certainly the only person of color. I'd like to think I walked through those doors that were open. And even if they were closed, maybe I nudged them a little bit and pushed them open. And that's been truly the way that I've lived my life and my career, all of which are values that were instilled in me from when I was a child. So I owe that to the resiliency that my parents instilled in me. But I'd like to think that Shirley Chisholm is a model for all of us in the way she conducted herself, but also, did not take no for an answer. I love her and her unfailing spirit.
Her name is Cicely Simpson. She is a government and public policy strategist, leadership coach, and keynote speaker, and of course, the creator of Chair Leadership Program. Cicely, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Great talking to you.
And that's it for this edition of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.
This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio. Find out more at ForbesBooksRadio.com.